So there was introduction from before. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the genetics of NPS and what the gene does. So as you've probably heard, NPS is inherited as what we call an autosomal dominant disorder. That means that affected individuals have a 50% chance of passing the condition to each child. It means you have one working copy of the gene and one that isn't working. Importantly, in the families where there's NPS going around, a child who does not inherit NPS from their affected parent cannot pass it on to their children. Okay, so as I was saying, we inherit one gene from mom and one gene from dad, and that applies to all genes, just as it does for LMX1B. So if one copy of LMX1B is not working, then there's not enough of a signal for cells to develop properly. What LMX1B is doing is that it binds to, it's what we call a transcription factor. It directs the expression of other genes so that certain genes have to be switched on or switched off in certain cells at different times of development in order for the body to develop properly. And so if there's not enough LMX1B in the cell at that time of development, then the cell will not develop properly. So when I was back at Hopkins years and years ago, we were looking at the different changes that occur in the gene that cause Neil patella syndrome, and overall there was 150 or some different mutations were identified. In your families, there will be very few of you who could go back in your family tree more than 4 or 5 generations and not see and still find Neil patella syndrome, sorry. So the mutations occur in DNA all the time. And it just so happens that if one of them occurs in LMX1B, then we'll get what we call the sporadic cases or new cases where there's no family history. There was a question I saw on the list about somebody saying that they were in the 10 or 15% who do not have mutations that are readily identifiable. What we know is occurring in at least some of these situations is that the whole gene has been lost rather than a specific change in the spelling of the instructions, that the whole gene is missing. That doesn't make the Neil patella syndrome any more severe. It just makes it more difficult to identify in the routine testing. There are also some instances where it's just that we don't know enough about how genes work to find every possible change. Also, the particular mutation that might be identified in one copy of your LMX1B genes or one LMX1B gene is not determinant of your range of symptoms or the severity of the disease. And you may have seen that also in some families where obviously everyone in the same family will have the same mutation in their DNA, and yet somebody in the family may have glaucoma, another person will have kidney disease. So the particular LMX1B mutation does not predict the range or severity of symptoms. So LMX1B is expressed early in development, and if I was able to show you this picture, it would show you where that is early in mouse development. So it defines the development of dorsal specific structures in the limb, and that's why your fingernails are affected. That's why the kneecap is affected, because embryologically that's a dorsal structure. Dorsal means back, sorry. Ventral is front or underneath. So the back of your limb, these are dorsal structures. So that's why your fingernails are affected. If you have what we call swan necking of your fingers, then that's because of the positioning of the tendons, either above and below and so forth. So the gene is required for the normal development of dorsal structures in the limb. We also see it being required for proper development in the spinal cord. And so that affects some of the feeling you may have of not feeling temperature or pain in your fingertips is due to the way the nerves have developed there. It's required for the normal development of the kidney, specifically, as Kevin was talking about, specifically cells called podocytes that are involved in the membrane differentiation and filtering in the kidney. Required for normal development of the eye. As Sam was suggesting, it's expressed in what's called the periocular mesenchyme in the cell of the eye, and that the tissues like the sclera, the cornea, and then most importantly, trabecular meshwork will not develop properly with the absence of sufficient amounts of LMX1B. Also, it's expressed in the brain during development for the development of certain types of neurons, and that is almost certainly related to why we see an increased risk of, or increased occurrence of, attention deficit disorder, some forms of depression possibly in neil patella syndrome, and also I saw a lot of questions about chronic fatigue syndrome. That may, but there's a lot of debate in some circles about what actually causes chronic fatigue. It may be due to deficiency of serotonin or a problem with serotonin in the blood. And again, that comes from neurons that again are require LMX1B to develop properly. So something along the lines of chronic fatigue syndrome could be a result of insufficient LMX1B during development of the brain. Since I don't have my pictures, I'll just summarize by saying LMX1B is a transcription factor. It's during development, we can see that it is expressed in tissues that are affected by an NPS, and NPS itself is the result of loss of function mutations in the LMX1B gene. So LMX1B is the name of the gene. It's also the name of the protein that the gene makes. And as I said, it's a transcription factor that directs the development of specific tissues. So sorry I couldn't get my slides to work. Hopefully if we do this again sometime, I'll have it all fixed.